So welcome back to No Book Left Behind. I'm your host Mark, and today it's my monthly reading roundup for March. Okay, so let's get into it. How did I get on this month with my Read What You Own challenge? How many titles from that TBR for this month did I manage to read? Let's find out. Well, this is not going to be a very long video, by the way. It's going to be fairly short, and you'll see why that is as we go along. But first, of course, what I have to do is just quickly summarise the 5 books I read in the first half of the month, which were featured in my mid-month reading roundup. And those were The Invention of Morale by Adolfo Bioy Casares. This was a book written in 1940 about a man on the run who ends up on a supposedly deserted island and finds out it's not so deserted at all. It's been turned into a movie several times, one of which, the 1975 version, I think is particularly good. I really like that movie, and that's what led me to the source material here. This is a very slim book, unfortunately, and doesn't really develop the story any more than the movie version did, so there were no surprises in it for me, so it was a little disappointing. Should have read the book first. After that, I read Jeffrey Deaver's Trouble in Mind. This is a collection of short stories, a couple of which feature his paraplegic detective, forensic detective, I should say, Lincoln Rhyme. And this is a very, very solid collection indeed. Very good value for money at almost 500 pages. I really enjoyed that a great deal. But then there aren't many books by Deaver that I haven't really enjoyed, to be honest. I think he's an absolute master. After that, I read Mexploitation Cinema, a critical history of Mexican vampire wrestling, Ape Man and similar films, 1957 to 1977. This is by a guy called Doyle Green, who talks about the societal cultural impact of those movies and puts them in a historical context. That sounds a bit bizarre if you're talking about films like that, but yeah, he makes some good points in here, and as a fan of those kind of movies, I really did enjoy that. Next up was, I'm running out. The table is very overburdened today. So you might hear it crash at some point, but I hope not. Anyway, the next book I read was Evil Roots, the 10th book published in the British Library's Tales of the Weird series. Of course, it's a collection of short stories, all based on killer tales of the botanical Gothic. Killer plants, basically, although that's not quite everything that's here. This one, well, if you've been following this channel for any length of time, you'll know what I do with the Tales from the Weird series. That is that every 3 books, I make a video about those 3. So there's been a book out about... I'm making a right mess of this today, aren't I? There's been a video out about the first 3 books in the series, then books 4 to 6, then books 7 to 9. So there'll be a video coming about books 10 to 12. So don't really need to talk about this one too much, do I? And lastly, in the first half of the month, I read this biography of film director George Cukor, A Double Life by Patrick McGilligan, and I thought that was very interesting. It's insanely well researched, so much detail in here. I did enjoy it. I don't think it's particularly essential unless you're a particular fan of classic era Hollywood and this specific director. It was still interesting though, and I enjoyed it a lot. So those were the first 5 books I read in the first half of the month, or the only 5 I read in the first half of the month, really. Now let's put these out of the way on the floor, because otherwise this table is just going to fall over, and health and safety, obviously. Right, now let's move on to the second half of the month. That's what we're here for. Let's find out what else I managed to read. Well, the first one was The Witches by Peter Curtis. And if you're following the channel, you'll know I've already done a video about this, a full review. So there's not really much point talking about it anymore, other than to say I enjoyed it. Next up was another of the British Library's Tales of the Weird series, Promethean Horrors. Classic tales of mad science. Now, as I've already said in this video, I do review these Tales of the Weird books in sets of 3, and the video with number 10, Evil Roots, number 11, this one, and number 12, is coming next week. And that's because I've already read number 12, because it was one of my top books for 2025. And the reason for that is when I first found out about this Tales of the Weird series many years after it started publishing, I bought 3 books on a job lot. One of those happened to be the very first one that was published, and the other 2 were books number 12 and 17, I think. So I've already actually read book 12 last year, and in fact I've talked about it already in my top 10 books of that year, but I'll be talking about it again in a video next week along with this one and Evil Roots. So there's not much point in talking about this now, is there? So I told you it was going to be a shorter video. So next up, and book I will be talking about, and that was Fortunate Son by John Fogerty, the lead singer, songwriter and guitarist with the legendary 60s band Creedence Clearwater Revival, who I'm a big fan of. Now, this is a story of a rock and roll survivor, but it's not your run-of-the-mill rock and roll survival story. It's not about wrestling with drink or drugs, although he did have an alcohol problem for a while. No, his career was more derailed by legal action. Yeah, sadly, Fogerty spent much of the 70s and 80s in the courtroom rather than in the recording studio. And this all began when his band signed their first legal contract as Creedence Clearwater Revival in January 1968. They signed with a very small label called Fantasy Records, which was pretty much a one-man band led by a guy called Saul Zaentz. Now, obviously, these young guys knew nothing about the legal side of things, but it turned out the bass player had a father who was a prominent attorney, so they basically gave all the documents to the bass player and said, show your dad, tell him, we want to know what he thinks. Well, basically, he thought it was fine, apparently, so they signed. Although Fogerty does express severe doubt in subsequent years here that the attorney ever did see the papers at all. Anyway, the problem with this contract, as it turned out, was it stipulated that the band deliver 180 finished, mastered, complete songs in only 7 years, which is roughly 25 songs a year. Now, this was from an era when bands routinely put out a couple of albums a year. Creedence even managed 3 albums themselves in 1969, because records back then were a lot shorter than they are now. They were only 35 to 40 minutes because it was the vinyl era, not the CD or digital streaming era. So records had to be shorter. But even so, when bands did that, there tended to be cover versions on those records to pad them out to full length. And cover versions didn't count towards those 180 songs, unfortunately. Now, when the band eventually split up in 1972, they'd recorded about 60 songs, I would guess, which qualified as part of this 180 contracted song deal. And Fantasy Records and Zaentz dropped their options for the 3 other members of the band other than Fogerty, because he was the main man. So this ended up with Fogerty owning Fantasy Records pretty much over 100 songs. Fully finished, completed and mastered songs as well. So yeah, Fogerty was obviously not really very happy about that, so took legal action to try and get out of the contract. And this did drag on for a few years before he finally managed to extract himself, and unfortunately at the price of giving up all his royalties for those songs and ownership of them. By now, Fogerty had begun a solo career, and in 1980 he delivered what would turn out to be his biggest solo record, a number called Centerfield. And on this album there was a song called The Old Man Down the Road, which was the first single and which was a big hit in the US. Unfortunately, Zaentz and Fantasy Records sued him over it because they reckoned it sounded far too much like the Creedence song Run Through the Jungle, which obviously Fogerty had written but they owned. So he was being accused of plagiarizing himself, basically. Now, this did go through court and the legal process, and it went on for a few years until Fogerty eventually won. But it was another 5 years before he got his legal costs back, and he had to go all the way up to the US Supreme Court to get them. Would you believe it? So, yes, that did... Obviously, he was spending a lot more time in the courtroom than in the recording studio at that point. Didn't do himself any favours though, because a couple of years later, with his next record, Eye of the Zombie, he included 2 songs, one called Mr. Greed and one called Zans Can't Dance, which was fairly close to Zant's Can't Dance. And I'm afraid Saul took exception to all this and basically sued him. So again, more time with lawyers, less time in the recording studio. But that wasn't everything. The other major issues revolved around his ex-bandmates. You see, Fogerty didn't just write all the songs, sing them and play lead guitar on them, he arranged them all too. And as Fogerty says in the book, quote, "Most people just hear music as one big sound coming at you. When I heard music, I heard the parts." End quote. So according to Fogerty, he didn't just arrange the songs, he also, as tactfully as possible, taught all the other members the parts that they had to play, because he heard everything finished in his head. And undeniably he was frustrated when they either couldn't understand what he wanted or weren't technically able to deliver it. So Fogerty often ended up going back into the studio himself to add things like all the backing vocals, the hand claps, who knows what else. On page, I think it's 376 of the book, if I recall correctly, Fogerty says, quote, "As you might guess, I'm a bit of a control freak." Which is pretty hilarious, to be honest, because I'm sorry, John, but we realised that about page 30, Didn't take towards the end of the book to come to that conclusion. So it doesn't take a genius to work out that sounds like a recipe for disaster, and a lot of resentment built up over the years about Fogerty's role in the band and how the other members were diminished. And that led them to side with Zantz throughout all those legal struggles throughout the 1970s. And Fogerty obviously felt that was an enormous betrayal, particularly as he'd actually insisted that despite being the songwriter, all the royalties for all the recordings be split 4 ways. Something that doesn't seem to have held much weight with the other 3 members of the group for some reason. And in fact, later on, there were more legal wrangles, this time between Doug Clifford, the drummer, and Stu Cook, the bass player, and Fogerty, because they wanted to tour a new lineup of the band. I think this was in the 1980s, but use the name Creedence Clearwater Revival, and Fogerty wasn't having that. So that all went to court as well. Clearly, this long-term aggravation and experience caused a lot of trust issues. And Fogerty made several of his solo records as entirely a one-man band, even teaching himself the drums, presumably so he didn't have to hire somebody to play on the sessions. Fortunately, Fogerty met Julie Lynn Kramer in 1986 and the couple married and had 3 children. And she even gets to write a couple of chapters here, and her viewpoint is pretty valuable on those early years when Fogerty was still suffering such emotional trauma. And it's easy to see why he's so obviously completely daffy about her still after all this time, because she stood by him in what was a very difficult situation. And if you want an even happier ending, well, in January 2023, Fogerty announced that he'd regained control over the entire Creedence Clearwater Revival back catalogue. He owned his songs again, a mere 9 years after the death of Saul Zaentz and 55 years after the band signed that fateful contract. Now, I enjoyed this book quite a lot. There's not a lot of humour in it, I would say that, which some people might find a little dry. And there aren't any tales of wild 1960s rock and roll hedonism either. For Fogerty, it was always about the music. And if you want evidence of that, well, there's an early chapter in the book where he talks about his enthusiasm, or more likely his obsession, for early rock and roll singles. And he goes through a whole catalogue of obscure titles, praising them for the great guitar riff here or the great piano bit there. He's a true enthusiast. So if you ever do happen to run into him, well, just be warned, don't get him on that topic or he'll talk your ears off. and that one is The Lives of Robert Ryan by J.R. Jones. This is a biography of the film actor, probably best remembered these days for playing various heavies in Hollywood movies of the 40s and 50s, although he did take on heroic roles too, and he also trod the board to some success, winning an award for his performance in Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night. In a similar vein to Fogerty's story, this is not a tale of scandal, bad behaviour and Hollywood excess. Ryan did have a bit of a drinking problem, and he was prone to black moods from time to time, which does kind of mirror some of Fogerty's experiences. But like Fogerty, he was mostly known as a contented family man who was married to the same woman, Jessica Ryan, the author, for 33 years, and they had 3 children together. There does seem to have been the very occasional indiscretion on his part, the only notable time being, though, the affair he had with actress Merle Oberon, where they were off on location filming Berlin Express in the late 1940s. In comparison with a large amount of Hollywood Babylon, if you like, the guy was almost a saint. Ryan was a lifelong liberal and very active in politics, but he was only support achievable change, not castles in the air. He was a pragmatist. He was a great supporter of civil rights and marched with Martin Luther King to Washington. But on occasion, he would actually vote Republican if he felt that candidate was the right man for the job concerned. Despite what some would call his left-leaning politics, he was never directly affiliated with the Communist Party and does seem to have completely dodged the Red Scare of the 1950s and the blacklist from the House Un-American Activities Committee, although it's pretty certain that the FBI probably had a file on him. Ryan was on contract at RKO Studios when they were taken over by Howard Hughes, and there are some very interesting anecdotes about his particular business practices in the movie world, and I'm going to have a look and see if anyone's written a specific book about this, because it does sound like a fascinating subject. Ryan and his wife also started a progressive school in their backyard for the young children of the Hollywood community, and it became the Oakwood School, and it's still thriving today. And by progressive, I don't mean anything political, I mean in terms of teaching methodology. And its famous graduates include Chris Pine, Lily Rose Depp, Ava Max, Noah Wiley, film director Todd Haynes, and the children of avant-garde musician Frank Zappa. Now, I'm a huge fan of Ryan and his acting, and I thoroughly enjoyed finding out more about his process and his career and his life. But I think it's fair to say that this one's really for fans only. I think if you're uninitiated or ambivalent towards him, I'm not sure there's much to interest you here. But if you aren't familiar and you want to check him out, I'm going to recommend some movies, because he gave some stellar performances in some classic films. The first one that springs to mind is his role as Deke Thornton in The Wild Bunch, for example. And then there's his role as embattled boxer Stoker Thompson in The Setup, a classic noir from 1949. Then you've also got his vicious, bigoted soldier in Crossfire in 1947, which is a classic, and actually garnered him his one and only Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He's also a great villain in the classic western The Naked Spur from 1944, and his portrayal of the sadistic master-at-arms in 1962's Billy Budd is absolutely essential. He was one of those guys who elevated whatever film he was in. Even something that was mediocre was far better just due to the fact that he was there giving it his all. I watched a spaghetti western the other day from 1968 and the tail end of his career called A Minute to Pray, A Second to Die, and it wasn't a great movie, but God, Ryan was just so cool in it. So those were the books that I managed to read this month, and if you're thinking I'm one short of the 10 named on my TBR, yeah, I am. That's because that 10th one is Audrey Hepburn, Her Real Story by Alexander Walker, and you can probably see there's a bookmark in there, and well, I'm about halfway through it. Well, a little bit over halfway, so a bit disappointed with that. It won't be in my TBR video tomorrow because I'll be picking out 10 new titles that I'm hoping to read in April, but of course I'll be finishing that one as well. Fingers crossed. So how did that pan out with my Read What You Own challenge? Well, it's time for some drum rolls, and it's basically time to review the numbers, see where I've got to at the end of March when I'm a quarter of the way through. And before you judge me too harshly, please remember last year, the entirety of 2025, I only read 57 books, so I think I'm on target to do more than twice that this year. Anyway, here are the numbers. So that's it for today's video. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Please express yourself in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed it, why not pop a like and even subscribe to the channel? It's much appreciated. So that's it for today. In the meantime, before I see you again, please remember, keep looking through those strange second-hand bookshops that you find in the narrow streets of your town. Keep visiting those market stalls, car boot sales, and rummaging through those charity bins, because there are treasures out there that only you can find. Be seeing you.